Welcome to 360 View, where we dig into an important topic facing consumer goods and retail executives and explore it from all angles. I'm Lisa Johnston. I'm the editor-in-chief of CGT, and I'm talking with Michael Connor, who leads the global CPG team for AWS. We're going to explore the role of generative AI in marketing, get a little granular about how this is different from what is already out there. So Connor, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Good to see you.
All right, let's talk about some use cases. Tell us a little bit about the ways that generative AI in marketing has really exciting and transformational potential. Why is this different from what's already out there now?
Yeah, there's a couple areas. One, I think, is generative images. I think when I looked at this a year ago, I kind of laughed and said, no brand will ever use generative images on their campaigns because people were cross-eyed and they had, it was obviously fake. People had 7 fingers. And I said, brands, of course, my background is Coca-Cola. Brands care about every single pixel being perfect. I remember when I was at Coca-Cola, like every piece of condensation on the bottle had to be just right. And I said, they'll never use it. And boy, was I wrong. The level of quality on the images is incredible. And so for marketers, the ability to create images that are more inclusive, to create more of them with less money. A lot of photo shoots are $200K to $2 million. And so I think brands have been kind of limited in terms of, if they have a creative idea, being able to go and execute against that. Of course, it takes a long time. And so their ability to be really innovative and creative and to create new product shots and to connect with a diverse set of customers and consumers, I think is really unprecedented. And I think we'll see some incredible stuff happening in the next couple of years. We're already doing stuff with customers where we had one beer customer where we were generating a beer ad for every single beach in the world, something you just couldn't do before. So I think that's a really interesting use case. I think the other use case for me is I think the way that we find things, especially products right now, a lot of times it's been through Google search engines and things like that. And typically you type in a keyword and it tries to do a keyword match, and then it comes back and you're kind of left going and clicking and exploring, and you've got 10 links and you're digging through, and your ability to have more of a conversation with someone, like as though like you called a friend of yours who's an expert in nutrition or fashion or whatever that was, and you had a high bandwidth conversation about what you care about, and of course they know you so they can kind of tailor to you. That's the way I think that people will find products and understand them in very short order. We're already doing proof of concepts. This is really close to being in production. So I think everyone's just kind of figuring out some of the final steps to get it out there. But also just marketers in general, when I was at again, Coca-Cola and most of my customers, we always saw people in segments, male, female, 18 to 24 in the Southeast. We always wanted to have this really intimate conversation with an individual. But of course, we just didn't have the bandwidth to do that. So now with large language models and also with the images, we can take what we know about a person, what we know about our brands, content, influencers and celebrities who are, endorse us and things like that. We can have this super intimate conversation we never had before. So I'm really excited about that. It's what we've always wanted to do, and it's just now possible.
Well, we do need to talk about ethics. And we know that when it comes to the ethical use of AI in marketing, just as it matters with the design details, it matters even more when it comes to the details of ethically using AI, so that you're not, to reduce the risk of bias, as we talked about, making progress, but also alienating consumers. So what are some of the considerations that retail and CPG executives should have when it comes to using this technology and as the technology evolves?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of my customers was talking about how their brand was all about authenticity. So when we were talking about generative images, they said that the idea of using someone who wasn't real, who was created through AI, would be offensive to the customers that they had that were loyal for a long time, that really believed in the brand and the authenticity around that. So that's one of those issues, and so we see a lot of brands where they're doing things like engaging models where they're buying the rights to and licensing their likeness, and then including that in generative images. So that way it's a real person. They have an agreement with that person. Someone is being paid. And then they have control over those images, but now they can do more photo shoots. They can change things after the fact. So that's one approach. But the other issue is, I think, around bias, certainly inclusion. I got burned with that early on in my career, where we were training some data, a model on data that didn't have a diverse set of people, and I got really kind of burned on that. And so almost every brand we're talking to them about responsible use and being very deliberate about how the model is trained. And so Twilio came out with a really interesting thing I saw last week, where they had nutrition labels for AI projects. And the label is basically, how do we articulate very clearly in a very concise manner what this model is? Is it inclusive? Is there bias involved? Things like that. So you're asking each group internally to be thoughtful about things like bias, risk to the brand, and very clearly show that to people before it goes live, certainly.
So on that note of being responsible, you've talked in the past about creating a responsible use framework for AI. So what's your sense on how far along retailers and CPG companies are on this front? And where do you see more progress to be made?
I think most people right now, well, early on, they were just excited about the technology, and they're thinking that we can do all this stuff. And I think we're past that. And now we're seeing companies actually get into implementations. We're seeing proof of concepts, people rolling stuff out into production. And so now people are much more into the, how do we operationalize this? What are the risks of the brand? Of course, larger brands are always concerned about lawsuits and liability and risk to the brand, especially if they have tremendous brand equity, like a lot of companies do. And so they're asking a lot of really poignant questions about, how is this model trained? Where did the data come from? How is it licensed? And so there's been a couple high-profile class action lawsuits around that too, recently, with some of the companies that are creating the large language models. And so that's one of the things where, with responsible use, to really ask, where did this model come from? How was it trained? The data it was trained on, was it legally sourced? And a good example is, if you have a code generator model, you want to make sure that it was trained on code that was what we call copy, that isn't copied left, right? Something like a GPL licensed code. If you use that in your code base, you would be obligated to then open source that, right? And so you want to make sure that that code generator was trained on stuff that was fully licensed, something that was like MIT or BSD licensed, something like that.
All right. Well, final question. What is the biggest misconception when it comes to generative AI in marketing?
Biggest misconception. So when you say misconception, do you mean like misunderstanding for what it will do, or how it works, or?
Well, when you're talking with retail and CPG executives, what are you finding that the biggest thing that they're misunderstanding about using generative AI in marketing?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So what I find is that people are overestimating what the technology can do. And so a lot of the problems that retailers and also consumer products companies have had in the past around keeping good data hygiene, data accuracy, availability and accessibility of data, like there's all these things that companies kind of know that they need to do in order to be kind of data-driven companies. And they're imagining that these large language models all of a sudden are going to solve all of their problems and answer all their questions. And so I see people going into the generative AI, and they're asking questions like, what will my sales be in this channel next quarter? What kind of growth would I expect? What are consumers, what are the consumer trends? And what they don't realize is most of these models were trained in Q4 of 2021. So they don't even know what's happened in the last 2 years. And also there's a lot of data that just isn't available to them, like your internal sales data, your consumer database, your customer database, all that kind of stuff. So they're really overestimating the ability of the models. And I've seen people, a CISO I had dinner with a couple of weeks ago, he said he's seeing business people that are getting projections from models, and they're making business decisions. And an interesting thing happens if you ask it for, like, what will my growth be next quarter? Sometimes they'll say 12.3%. If you ask it again, it may say 20.7%. And so, you quickly realize that you've got to be careful. And so for the most part, we safeguard this kind of stuff. And we set up the models so that when they tell you a statistic, they give you traceability back to where it got it. So you want it to tell you the PDF, the line number, the database. and really be clear about where the data came from, so you can make sure that you're checking your sources. So that's the biggest misconception, is the overestimation. So it's kind of the trough of disillusionment that we talk about.
And it needs to get better at citing its sources.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Connor, great words to leave us with. Thanks so much for joining 360 View.
Thank you. It's good to see you.